So welcome everyone. Thank you very much for being with us today. We have an amazing panel with us and we have a super important topic. We'll be talking about greening buildings and construction and how do we get to net zero buildings sooner rather than later. So first, let me introduce myself very quickly. My name is Hamza. I'm an associate director at the Boston Consulting Group working on climate and sustainability. And before turning to my panel and have them introduce themselves, I'd like to maybe set the scene a little bit for us and talk about what is at stake. So as of 2021, the building and construction sector accounted for 37% of energy and process-related emissions and 34% of energy demand globally. It has an enormous footprint. In 2021 alone, investment globally on building and construction was around $240 billion. And while 80% of NDCs, the national climate plans, mention buildings, only 26% of countries actually have mandatory building energy codes. And this question of greening the building sector and getting to net zero buildings is not only a question for the developed world and the rich world, far from it. You know that mass urbanization is actually driven by demographic growth and economic growth in the global south, in developing countries. For example, in Africa, 80% of the buildings that will exist by 2050 are yet to be built. And by then, Africa will have 1.2 billion more people than it has today. So it's a topic that is very relevant for the global south. Buildings have a very long life cycle as well. So those that are being built today will still be around well past 2050, past 2070. And by then, you know, the climate will have evolved, likely. And so it's important that first they are adapted to how the climate will look like at that time. And also it's important to avoid locking in greenhouse gas emissions. Yet today, only 1% of buildings worldwide are net zero. And we cannot get to global net zero targets or even build a resilient world without greening the building sector. So what we want to do today is really to talk about solutions, about implementation, and about the way forward. And how can financiers, designers, owners, policymakers at all levels, at the local and the national level, cooperate and collaborate to ensure that we can green the building sector. So with us today, we have Ms. Tessa from, who's the sustainability lead for Africa, India, and the Middle East at Arup. We have Mr. Chris Wan, who's the design management lead at Masdar. And we have Ms. Amira Ayoub, who's the head of the Middle East and North Africa for the World Green Building Council. So let me turn to my panel and ask them to quickly introduce themselves. Tessa, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Tessa. I am South African and from Cape Town. As has been said, I lead our sustainability business, Africa, India, Middle East, and I'm an architect by training. So I've spent over, I think, almost 20 years in industry, starting as an architect, but then most recently over 12 years as Arup, where I've been working, leading multidisciplinary integrated design teams, starting with buildings and leading it at that scale, but most recently extending that design thinking up to master planning scale. So I'm really excited for this conversation today. It's something very close to my heart, and I look forward to a stimulating discussion. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tessa. Mr. Wan, if you want to introduce yourself briefly.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Wan. I head up the design management works at Masdar City, a sustainable city in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE. My role is the management of the architecture, engineering, design of all the green buildings at Masdar City, from its inception and briefing all the way to the construction delivery. I think this subject today is a very personal subject to me. It's why I am working at Masdar City, and the building industry has been such a huge and diverse industry with so many different players. We all know we need net zero energy buildings, and we need to work together to figure out what's the best way to get there. And hopefully today I have an opportunity to share some of those thoughts and challenges we've met along the way.
Looking forward to it. And lastly, Ms. Amira Ayoub.
Thank you, Hamza, and thank you everyone for being here with us today. I am Amira Ayoub. I am the head of the Middle East and North Africa at programs at the World Green Building Council. I also wear another hat, which is I'm an architect, a regenerative practitioner, a sustainable and healthy building consultant. So I don't only work with our green building councils closely, I also work in the market, and I see the challenges, and I understand the importance of this topic today. And the World Green Building Councils, we have different regions, and we oversee, and we are a member network of more than 77 green building councils. We have 9 green building councils in the MENA region. So our main objective is we have lots of events happening here at COP, and one of the most important things is to put the built environment as a solution for the climate crisis that we are having. So I'm happy to walk with you through this topic today.
Exactly. So you see, we have an amazing panel with us today. And so we all know that we need to green the building sector because we can't get to net zero without it. So we have the technology. We know it's important. We know that building greener improves not only the emissions footprint, but also the quality of life most of the time. So let me start with a very broad question to you all, and please take it as you want. But why are we not building more net zero buildings? Who wants to get us started?
I'll take a start.
Yes?
I think the starting point, and I'll use the journey that we went through at Masdar City as a way to explain it. The starting point for most people, for most building owners and developers, you start from the basic regulations, building regulations. Many building regulations specify your minimum requirements in terms of how you treat energy. And that's where we started as well. But we soon realized that this is not going to get us where we want to go. So we wanted to figure out ways to improve and work on this, and hopefully being an influencer working with the regulatory authorities to move forward. So in a nutshell, we do not have more net zero energy buildings today because the baseline in most regulatory systems is just far too low.
All right. Tessa, you want to comment that?
I certainly think that one of the biggest barriers that I see as a designer working with the built environment and with a wide variety of clients is that there's a lot of hesitation around how we start, and I think there's a lot of barriers related to the process of that. I think that there can be a lot of fear around tools and how we measure actually seeing how the building is or is not net zero energy and non-embodied carbon. So what I always try and say is just keep it simple. So we really need to go back to first principles design and not overcomplicate things with too many tools that could be conceived as complicated and become a barrier.
Yeah. Amira, maybe you want to...
Yeah, this is an excellent question. We've been brainstorming with our green building councils in the MENA region since the beginning of the year about why, and this question mark. And if we are talking about sustainable built environment for everyone, everywhere, this requires a lot of action in the region. So our first answer was the lack of awareness. We can see that there is a big people don't understand what we are talking about. And one of the major success points for COP this year that I would like to celebrate every now and then, I say this at every panel I join, that I am happy with what COP brought to Egypt, because people in the streets right now understand what is climate change. I just can come and try to convince you to build in a sustainable manner while you don't understand why. So again, the lack of awareness in the region is one of the major issues that we have, and that's why we try to collaborate with our Green Building Council to work on an awareness raising campaign so that we can reach everyone everywhere. So this is one of the major issues. And the other issue is that we are working in silos. We don't know, we have solutions. Someone said a couple of days ago that here is COP, we have solutions, and everyone came with their unique piece of puzzle to create one full picture. So if we have the solution, why didn't we create the picture until now? I think that we need to understand what is everyone doing. We need to collaborate. We need to create that space where everyone is involved, policymakers, government, private sector, people working on finance, data, so that we can all understand what is going on and oversee everybody's work and collaborate together to come up with new solutions. So maybe we need to create that space where everyone can work together towards sustainable built environment.
All right, so more collaboration, multidisciplinary collaboration, better regulation, better design principles. So let me take this last piece. So we know that integrated design is a critical piece to get to net zero buildings. Maybe Tessa, you want to tell us a little bit more about these principles and this process?
Certainly, Hamza. Integrated design and the principles around that is exactly what I do. I call myself an integrator. I'm passionate about how we can combine all of the deep technical expertise that we have and that we need when working on buildings and cities projects to achieve sustainable outcomes. And net zero buildings is the top sustainable outcome at the moment that we need to be focused on within the decarbonization space. So when considering integrated design, I always think it's two things. It is about process and product. And first of all, when starting with the process, there are so many skills that we have within the different disciplines. Like I recently worked on a project in Cape Town where we had 13 different disciplines that Arab were doing, never mind the other disciplines that sit outside of our space. And the only way that we can get all of those disciplines working together in an optimum way is to focus on process. As an example, there are many skills, so for instance, building physics skills, which we see within the building envelope space, and how can those exact same skills be used at a master planning space to scale up? You know, the question here is how do we scale net zero? And if we consider the skills that we have and inherently silo them, I think that we're limiting ourselves. We need to be scaling those same skills and using them across scale. Then in terms of the products, if we just think about how one of the most important things we need to do is be dematerializing what we do, doing more out of less. And the only way that we can do that is to involve all of our disciplines throughout the process and work together to achieve multiple things from one item. So if we think, for instance, using exposed thermal mass in buildings, for instance, the only way you can achieve exposed thermal mass, which allows for moderated internal temperatures and therefore resilient comfort, is by speaking with the architect, structural engineer, mechanical engineer, electrical engineer, wet services engineer, a lighting designer, acoustic engineer, and interior architect, never mind the cost consultant, etc., etc., etc. So only through bringing all of those people together to answer this one question, which has so many components to it, can we achieve the outcome that allows us to dematerialize, have stable internal temperatures, that allows us to reduce our operational carbon emissions. So that's a little bit of potentially long-winded answer, but I hope that helped.
No, very, very insightful. Thank you, Tessa, for this. And so maybe we've been talking about process, we've been talking about mobilizing all this brain power and all these disciplines, but Chris, do we have the right tools and the technologies, and concretely, can we do it? You said you've been involved with Masdar basically since its inception. Can you share more with us what you learned in that journey?
First of all, I really do believe that the tools and technologies that we require exist already. True, technology is being further developed, and people talk about digital twins, the whole world of building information management. Yes, that will all help us to further improve. But even existing technologies is there available. And I think the word scaling, that's behind us, you see, is extremely important. And when we talk about scaling, one has to talk about everybody. Everybody needs to be involved. So therefore, the solutions has to be workable for everybody. And terms like we need to spend more money to produce net zero is something that's not going to work for everybody. So we need to develop methodologies that's accessible to all. And the most accessible, let's call it technology, is going back to what Tessa said about means and methods and processes. That's in that one area about understanding how we can work together. We can do so much more with what is available to us. And integrated design process is one of the methodology as opposed to the traditional linear process where an architect does a design and give it to a structural engineer who then passes it on to a mechanical, electrical engineer step by step. But in the integrated process, everyone works together, and oftentimes we find the best, most effective solutions are found in between the disciplines where they overlap. This method has been around for quite a while, and you may ask, well, why hasn't it still got us to where we want to be? So I'd like to put forward out there at Masdar City, we kind of experimented a couple of stages further. And the whole idea of integration is not, we found, to be most effective with just the design team, but a larger stakeholder field, including representatives of owners, people like myself who works in an owner's organization, but in the area of design, facilities management, the end user. Everyone has a stake and everyone needs to be involved. And the art of all of this is to find that platform where everyone can come together. What you need to invest with really is thought processes and intention and this magic buzzword called mindset.
All right. Amira, earlier we were talking about raising awareness, mobilizing a large coalition of actors. So how do we do that? How do we build the right coalitions? How do we create the momentum to ensure that going forward we will have more green buildings?
Well, Hamza, in MENA region, we have like some developed and other developing countries. And again, at the end of the day, we can see that the topic of net zero is still a scary topic for some people. So we started this year, at World Green Building Council, we have 3 strategic areas: advancing climate action, health and well-being, and resources and circularity. So this year, we wanted to focus on the climate action and advancing net zero. So to simplify, as Tessa said, to simplify the conversation, we created a program, we named it the MENA Net Zero Readiness, MENA Net Zero Collaborators. And for the MENA Net Zero Collaborators, it is that space that we are envisioning for the region to come and work together. It's for people from all stakeholders to gather and work together to create the MENA Net Zero Readiness Roadmap, building to COP28. So this is what we are working on right now, is to create that space. And if we want to learn from nature, when nature has a problem or an issue, it doesn't just concentrate on it. So if we are only going to concentrate on solutions for climate actions without taking into consideration the innovative ideas, and to get that creative or innovative ideas, we need to create that space of it, we will never be there. Nature doesn't work that way. Nature evolves. So we need to evolve. We just don't need to focus on the problems that we have. We need to get outside of that problem-solving mode. We need to go to creativity mode, to work collaborative mode, to innovative ideas mode. So I believe that the Net Zero Readiness Roadmap will be the platform that will gather everyone from the government, private sector, policymakers, to understand the gaps that we already have and create new ideas to fill in these gaps.
Excellent. Maybe Tessa, you want to build a little bit more on this answer?
To just to complement what you said, Amira, I think that sharing across all steps of the process, across both the process of design as well as the depth of the stakeholders, is absolutely critical. And certainly the role that the World Green Building Council and the regional networks play is absolutely critical in sharing across. And it's also platforms like these, where we are today at COP27 and Building to 28 in Dubai, which are such critical platforms for sharing. And one thing that I find quite a lot within my practice is, and how I practice and I also teach at university, is that it has to start with the students. It starts there, how we share our passions as well as our solutions. And as soon as that becomes part of our practice, that develops in how we work and through when we're delivering real life projects, until finally we're all in key decision makers, and until we're clients and developers and, you know, guiding and inspiring buildings from that level. But I think sharing the success stories and also sharing our failures is a really important part of this process.
Absolutely. Chris, did you want to complement this answer?
Yes, just adding to that, the idea of sharing, collaboration, we use these words and we actually do everything we can to practice this. I'm not saying that it is easy, right? There are multiple situations. I come back to a word of engagement and mindset again, and what can we do to get everyone on board. And I'd also like to put out there that in our experience in how to get that sharing going, right, starts from being young and going through the education system, and yet there are people like myself who way past the education system, and yet I still need to engage in the community to do all the right things. And so the solutions between the disciplines, as I call them, which is the effect of collaboration, right? What I find very, very helpful is two things. The first one is every time you have a project, have a mini mission statement for your project, something that no one wants to argue about, right? And if that statement is, using a recent example that we have, net zero energy for all, is a statement for a project that we're working on. The for all means affordability, right? And when you're developing a net zero energy project, that is at the bottom end of the commercial market. And so when you have a high-level statement and everyone agrees, let's go for this, right? That is the criteria that drives all the other disciplines. It makes it so much more easier for everyone to get to the same solution. I'll come up with an example later.
All right, so should we turn to the audience and see if there are any questions at this stage? Does anyone want to ask a question to our panelists? The lady over there.
Thank you so much. Very interesting conversation. I'm Amy Lahosky from Abu Dhabi Ports Group. So we actively aim to design and construct net zero buildings. Most recently, we won the MENA Net Zero Building of the Year Award, which is very exciting. But time and time again, the feedback from the group is it costs too much money and it takes too much time. It's not achievable yet. So I suppose a question to the panel in terms of how do we counter that discussion? How do we counter that point?
Maybe Chris, you want to give it a go?
The environment that I work in, Masdar City, is also a for-profit real estate company, right? And so this whole idea cost is absolutely critical. Totally understand that. And we didn't mention it earlier, but this collaboration does actually help on the cost. And I suppose one of the things that we've been moving through the last decade, we had our first net zero energy building probably about 5-6 years ago. It was very small, it was a villa. And then we kind of moved on from there, from lessons learned, and there were many challenges along the way. However, each of our buildings, we are judged under an investment criteria, because we are a part of an investment company. And these investment barriers are similar to other markets, and yet at the same time we're working with the same regulatory system and the same supply chain. Through the school of hard knocks and push, right, we are achieving buildings, and now we just started construction of a 12,000 square meter office building, right. It has a very high IRR to go with it, right. And it's been designed as we all work under constant time pressure all the time. It's no different for us, right? And in actual fact, we've been finding that collaboration, if done in an open way, could actually help you save a bit of time through avoiding abortive works, right? And so, in a nutshell, in the world of net zero design, and Tessa was mentioning earlier, getting things to do more than 2 jobs at the same time, right, is all part parcel, and design and costing. One of our buildings has an external fire escape that works as a balcony and works as a fixing system for the shading of the building. So it was one element, and that became part of the facade design. That was done deliberately because we could not afford to do those 3 elements separately and had them priced separately. So we just tabled the resources and got the fire engineer to work with the facade designer, to work with the lighting designer, and come up with a solution all in one go. So you start off with the goal in mind, what you're trying to do, and then you shut that door and get everyone to work together, sleeves out, and do these solutions come. And once people start understand mechanism, right, and through that teamwork, we find that in many places, very positive solutions can come up.
Maybe Tessa, you wanted to add something?
Certainly, thanks. So I think that the cost question is key because it's a big barrier. We spoke about barriers earlier to net zero buildings, and that certainly is a perception. So speaking from a South African perspective, the Green Building Council of South Africa has one of the credits where it's financial transparency. So through the buildings that we submit, through the certification process, we actually can track how much the cost of green design is. And certainly, if we look at buildings completed about 10 years ago within a South African context, it was up to 8.5%, 9% cost uplift. We've completed a building last year, which is the 6-star Green Star, so that's equivalent of BREEAM Platinum, or essentially it's world leadership. And yesterday, it was in fact awarded the most sustainable building in the world by the World Architectural Network. So quite a nice international recognition there. That building was 1.3% cost uplift, capex. Because the other key component of this is that that's the capital cost. With this particular building that we've designed, we've focused hugely on reducing the operational carbon emissions through energy efficient design, and in this particular context, through a mixed mode operation. So the OPEX costs will be significantly reduced. And then that goes back to how the building is procured, what mechanism is in place for that. And certainly as soon as we start getting building owners who can benefit from those OPEX savings, it starts to incentivize that decision making earlier on. Then on the time piece, good design takes time. Yes. Equally, it is possible to do it quicker, but only if the right tools are in place. And going back to the second question around integrated design, my provocation is that it's integrated design that allows for quicker design processes, but only if the relationships are in place already. Because when we work together in complex, high-pressure environments with demanding clients, lots of budget pressure, and always deadlines, the way to allow things to move quicker is to know the people that you're working with and have an element of trust. So in the same project, for instance, we had an incredibly fast-track program. We were from October 2018 to January the 9th, 2019, that's when excavation started. The building was occupied in November 2021. So in the scheme of a design and building process, that was incredibly quick. But what I can say, it's a testament to the relationships and the integrated design process that allowed that really quick program to go through. So for you as a client, my suggestion would be build teams around you that you trust and that have good relationships with each other. And what I think you will see is that over time, after a building and the next building and the next building, that the time thing can become smaller. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, you wanted to, Amira?
Yeah, I think that Tessa said it all, but I just need to highlight on something that we can also have at our timeline a time to slow down, because we are all running after, like, we have to deliver this. We need to slow down to make sure that we are on the right track, and this is the right decision. So in order to create that systemic change, we need to give ourselves a time to unlearn our traditional methods and relearn. And this just can't come in a short time. This needs time to reflect on what we achieved and what we already have and what we are looking for.
So next time you get that question, you tell them that not only you can save the climate, but you can save money as well. So that's what I'm taking away. Another question?
Yeah, thank you for that informative inputs. My question is talking about the MENA reality. There are a lot of countries that the only energy efficiency measure in the building is maximum 2 or 3 centimeters roof insulation, and that's full stop. Do you see any chances to leapfrog, so to say, in getting to that net zero buildings? Talking about scaling up. Thank you.
I think for scaling up, we need to celebrate case studies. We need to highlight case studies, because every day I meet with amazing people working on different projects, coming up with new rating tools, with applications, and to scale this up. Again, maybe this is my perspective, and this is the thing that I'm inviting everyone here to work with me on it next year, is to create that space to understand what we have. Because we have, for example, I'm Egyptian, and in Egypt we have energy code, but it's not implemented. No one is looking for it. It's not like you don't get an incentive even if you consider this. So we need to understand what we already have and celebrate the successful case studies from the leaders in the market to learn how we can scale it up.
So how do we better align incentives? There is regulation, but regulation is not everything. Can you build that a bit more on that?
If I have these questions, I wouldn't have created them. I don't have the answer, because I do believe that it's not like somebody's perspective, it's everybody's perspective, and we really need to listen to people to understand what incentives are they looking for. Yeah. Is it like finance, or is it like anything they would like to highlight on? So, and it differs from country to another. And if you are talking about the MENA scale, it differs from country to another. So I just can't say that I will propose an incentive or I will propose a policy in a country and predict that this is going to work on different countries. So I think that this is why we need to listen to the people.
Absolutely. Tessa, maybe you had a...
It's so interesting to hear about the policy landscapes in different countries, because my first answer would have been policy as a driver, especially when we think about something as simple as insulation and how the thermal performance of our building envelopes can contribute to comfort as well as energy consumption. So really interesting to hear about the Egyptian context. So perhaps the caveat to that one is around energy pricing, because if we have very weak thermal envelopes and without any insulation, for instance, we always have to then condition that, especially if the building isn't designed optimally. So, the orientation is poor, perhaps the glazing's facing the wrong way, and it's a leaky thermal envelope. So as soon as the cost of energy is such that you're actually paying and you're penalized for that cost of energy that you're now being forced to condition the building with, that is quite a useful market lever. It's a difficult answer to make because the global energy pricing is really variable at the moment. Like the energy context is challenging and varied across different parts of the world. But I think my opinion would be that if there's a direct relationship between the cost of energy and then how we can reduce that energy in our homes, that would be a market incentive, like a bottom-up market incentive to encourage people to spend the little bit of money once off to insulate your home instead of paying that lot of money forever.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yes. I like to think or believe that we're all sitting here and listening and debating because we're all passionate and want to do something. And so there's probably no one in this audience here that needs convincing. I think we're here just to find out what's the best way to do things. And so the best way to do things is in all our own area, just to become our thought leader in our area of speciality. So you can change by pushing from below, or you can change by pulling from above. And I like to think there's sufficient passion in this room that we need to pull from above, and that can create the change. If you push from below, what we are finding is that you end up having to force the issue, and then the whole cost thing kicks in because people are finding it too difficult to make that change without fully understanding. Whereas doing by example, we are finding to be more effective. Now, if I go pinpoint back to the installation question, if we go beyond the code, right, in this region, in many places, we still see the impact of, as architects, what we call the modern movement, the glass tower that symbolizes, economic progress, right? But if you go back to that other mission statement I mentioned, net zero energy for all, and you do that from an architecture engineering point of view, and you apply it to this glass building, you will not end up with a glass building. It just does not make sense. So suddenly you will say your glass needs to be less area, right? And if your glass is less area, you're going to save money for making less area and reducing all that energy that's going in that building, which required AC to compensate for. So that money you saved from having a smaller glass area, buy more insulation, then you're on your way towards net zero energy.
So follow-up question maybe?
Yeah. Completely clear the point that you made all. Maybe a critical question to Mr. Chris. So actually, I have learned that hype of Masdar 20 years back then. So I would assume Masdar would have the best ground to make it really a success story. Though there are, I don't know how many buildings built in that net zero, as net zero building. Why didn't it work out for Masdar? That's my point of view, of course. But you can correct me, of course.
Yeah. We started our journey back in 2006 when we put out there that we were building a zero carbon city. Right? We weren't quite sure how to do it, but we said we're going to do it. It's true that our earlier buildings were achieving 30-40% energy saving. That's the best we could do at the time, but we did not stop. As each building that we built, we figured out some way to improve upon the last one. And as I mentioned earlier, it's only by about 2015 to 2017 we actually built our first net zero energy buildings. And now we are scaling them. And so for us, this is a journey to figure out different ways. We were trying out different things as we were going along. Right? Today we have about 400,000 square meters of built development, right? All of it, all fully occupied, of varying degrees of sustainability. Almost starting from LEED Gold and LEED Platinum. I think we have one of the largest clusters of LEED Platinum buildings around. Not quite sure, but that's not the main point. The main point is that we keep on working to improve. And let's not forget the human dimensions. We're embracing well certification, well-being after the pandemic we've all gone through. Is the re-emphasis of health coming back in as part of sustainability. This is not forgotten. It's not about net zero only, but the message I will share is that we got this far by trying to find better ways to work together. We are still work in progress, right, for sure, work in progress. We are where we are with net zero buildings. We intend to go further. There's still much more to do. There's still the water dimension. Earlier, the audience talked about embodied carbons. We are dealing with that and making good progress in that area. And we are here today. I'd love to engage with anyone who wants to talk afterwards, that we can continue and share and figure out how to do this together.
Thank you very much, Chris. That's a very important point you just made about embodied emissions as well. And so I wouldn't want to have this conversation without mentioning that aspect also of the green building. So maybe Tessa, do you want to say a little bit more about
Yes.
How do we address that?
Yeah, thanks. So I think on that question as well, exactly what you said, every single building, we have to be better. And we also have to be kind to ourselves. Not every single building is going to be perfect. But the key thing is that we come to the table with this clear goal, exactly as you said, Chris. We've got a clear vision in mind, and we do our best to achieve that. And as long as there's a very clear understanding that each and every time we're doing better, then I think we need to just be a bit kind to ourselves. But on this note of the whole life emissions, because this is certainly part of the net zero conversation, it's absolutely critical. I think one of the key components here is actually understanding what we're achieving and learning from that. So every time we build and design something, we should be measuring that to understand exactly what we have achieved. We're in a very data scarce environment at the moment, where we don't actually have enough data on both elements of the operational piece is quite well understood. The embodied piece, much less well understood. We use aggregated data that's from a few countries in the world. It's not really locally relevant. And so one of the things that we can and should be doing is going through this process on each of our projects and measuring throughout the process, and then gathering the real life data at the end of the project and feeding that back into our decision making at the beginning. So that through this process of constantly iterating and constantly improving, and also sharing with industry so that we can learn from each other, through that is about scale. In my opinion, that is the answer to scale, understanding that more. So as an example of this, we at Arup we made a commitment last year that we would assess each of our buildings over the past year from a whole life carbon perspective. That was, the findings from that were discussed last week, and we, during this time, assessed 954 assets. And the key insight there is that what we see is creep throughout the project. We start at the beginning of the project thinking that we're doing so well, we have a clear goal, we're really great. But then over the time of the project, we loosen that up. There are two things related to that. The one could be the practicality of the building process, the design process alongside the building process. But the thing that I'm quite interested in, and the point I'm making, is around the data. Because it could be that the data that we're using at the beginning is not actually the real life data. So as soon as we can start gathering that, and again, feeding it back in, we can really start building and every single one of our projects getting better and better.
So incremental improvement. So we are almost at the end of our panel, but if you had one message for the audience today, one takeaway, what it would be in less than 30 seconds each.
Shall I start?
Sorry?
Shall I start?
Go ahead.
Start.
Yeah.
Start. Have a clear goal in mind and start. And then to the point I just made now, assess, measure, feedback, and share. And be kind to yourself. As long as we're all coming from a good place, we have to start somewhere, and what we must avoid doing is creating barriers. I think very often we create barriers in our own head that make things more complicated than they need to be. It doesn't need to be complicated. It can be simple.
Fantastic. Chris, your one message?
I would like to re-emphasize start. Right? And let's all agree that the only failure that we recognize is the failure to start. And we're just going to move from there. Then there's barriers, right? There's always will be barriers, right? And let's all become barrier managers and kind of get through those. As a kind of last point to share, one of the most effective ways that we've found to overcome barriers, and especially in the world of integrated design, is try to spend some time understanding other people's discipline and where they're coming from. You know, it's very difficult to have a discussion, debate, or argument with someone when you don't understand where they're coming from. So one of these practical solutions is we all need to kind of spread out and overlap what other people is doing, and don't get stuck in your own silos. Right.
Fantastic. Namira?
I think it's about forget about the problem, focus on the potential. Let's transform our challenges to opportunities. Let's learn from nature. Let's evolve. And let's forget about just solving the problems that we have.
Fantastic. So I think we came here to discuss green buildings, but we're taking away maybe advice for life. Start, be kind to yourselves. You know, the only failure is not to do it. So let me thank the UAE for having hosted this wonderful panel discussion. Thank the audience, of course, and the panelists for their amazing insights. And I guess we'll see you in COP28 to see where we are on green buildings. Thank you very much.